So this is the rear shock absorbers. They're non-adjustable, as you can see. The special active shock absorbers. The instructions are very vague, it just really tells you which one's top and which one's bottom. But it is quite simple, it's just a nut and bolt at the top and a nut and bolt at the bottom as well. So I bought these two items here. These are what the rear springs sit into. Because the van's done 61,000 miles, there's probably going to be some wear on these, so as I got the shock absorbers out, I might as well just get the springs out as well and replace these. I think these are really the only serviceable items on the rear springs that can cause any sort of issue. So for the front end, I've got the two shock absorbers. I'm also going to change the top mounts on either side. So this top mount will just sit there. And also, because I've lowered it, I've got some adjustable anti-roll bar links. Basically lowering the car puts the anti-roll bar under less stress, so it's less effective. So these are going to have to be 40mm longer than the originals, and there's obviously it's adjusted by a thread, one at the bottom, one at the top, and if you haven't got enough adjustment on the thread, you've got two longer bars as well. So the kit for the shock absorbers for the front comes with the main shock absorber body. It comes with open-ended nylon washer and a nylock nut, and some very vague instructions. Something that does make it easy, you've got a hole that goes through here. You put a bar through it, just means you can lean down on it, and then you can remove the spring. So to remove the rear shock absorber and the rear spring from a T5, first thing you need to do is jack the vehicle up. I jacked it up underneath the rear arm here, put it on an axle stand, and then I removed the wheel. Just means everything's nice and low. Then take the jack out of the way. This drops down. One of the really important things to do is to remove the two 13mm bolts from the anti-roll bar on either side. It then means the anti-roll bar will just drop down out of the way, and when this rear arm is low, you're not trying to put any twist in the anti-roll bar and you're not fighting against anything. So you've got the rear shock absorber. The top just has one single bolt, 17mm. That is removed from up in there, very easy to remove. And the lower bolt just goes onto the trailing arm down there. And that is a 21mm nut and bolt. Again, very easy to remove. So to remove the spring, you can put a bar through the centre of that. You can push down on it, and that then allows you to remove the spring out of the way. So I'm going to give that a go, put my knee on it. There you go. Now doing that one hand, just cut my wrist. But hey ho. So you've got the spring, you have the top mount, and then down here you've got the lower mount. So I'm going to replace this lower mount. The upper mount tends not to wear, but I'll give it a clean up and make sure everything's nicely lubed so it can all move. I'll clean in there and also up there as well, just around the bump stop. So this is the spring off the rear right hand side. It's not in bad condition considering it's done 40,000 miles. Bizarrely, I can never understand this myself, when the weight is on the vehicle you find these three all compressed together in these touch, and you can see evidence of that in there. I never quite understand why that is, because that then means you haven't got as much spring as you may maybe expect to. So it's only this part of the spring that really makes a difference and can compress. So the way it's made up, you've got a top mount here which goes into the top of the spring, and then you've got the bottom mount which goes on the bottom of the spring. Now I'll just position this in place. Now I don't know if you can see that, it's seated in place, but it goes right up to the stop there, so you know it's in exactly the right place. But maybe you can see it down inside there. And the bottom part goes the same way. You have the spiral goes right to the end there, so that part will actually sit just in there. And the way you can feel when it notches in place. There's a little notch cut out in here which lines up with a tang, if you like, on the trailing arm. So this is upside down, but everything's located from there, so you know when this sits over the area on the trailing arm, you know it's in the right place. You then need to make sure that the spring is seated in exactly the right place down here, and the same on the top mount. And it's at that point you can then let the trailing arm back up and put weight onto the spring. You know everything's in the right place then. But what I do, in order to give it a little bit of movement and to make sure nothing squeaks, I normally put a little bit of grease on these. I don't know whether that's something you're supposed to do, but it's certainly something I do. So I'll grease it up and I'll put it back in. So that's the spring in place. As you can see, that bottom pad's perfectly in place. So the way I did it, I put the top mount on first, put the spring up in place, and then added the rubber and seated the spring below it, and then I've just put the jack underneath just to move it in place. So I think the next thing to do is to get the shock absorber on. So we've got the shock here, you need to make sure it's up the right way, that being the top and this being the bottom. So as I said before, one bolt goes through the top there and one through the bottom here, and you can position this, you can turn it and position it just to line it up really easily. So I've got the driver's side complete. It's been a bit of an epic. The only thing I need to do on this side now is just tighten up the anti-roll bar bush where I've taken it off. Top and bottom, in fact I've replaced it. But it is a bit of an epic. I'll show you the other side. This is all displaced, ready for the strut to come out. So really what you have to do, the panel that goes across here, you take that off, and also the weather strip that goes across here, you take this off as well. And there's two panels either end that just come off with 1, 2 screws, pulls out, gives you access in there to the top of the strut. Another panel here, 1 screw, 2 screws, it moves out of the way and the access is there. I've got a lot of cleaning up to do, as you can see. So you take off the anti-roll bar link from here and down here. Obviously remove these cables, make sure they're nice and loose. I didn't have the correct tools to remove the lower ball joint, so what I've opted to do is just remove the control arm, or the lower arm of the suspension, which is just 2 bolts. That was really easy. And you take the nut off just here where you take the nut off just here that is for the drive shaft, and just knock that back through. As you can see, it's just moved a little bit. That gives you enough room just to drop the cylinder down. Just a few taps on a hammer here brings it down, and then you can bring it out at this angle. So this is ready now for the top nut to be taken off and then removed, and then we'll change the spring over onto the new unit. So we've got the strut off the van now, and just put some spring compressors on it loosely. What I'm going to change is the top mount, or rather remove the top mount and put a new one in place. The spring needs to be moved over onto the new shock absorber assembly. And the top mount is made up of, it's a bearing to allow the whole strut to move. So you've got the bearing that goes there, you've got the strut that goes next, that actually just goes into that, and then sitting on top just there is the upper mount. That all sits on here. This protrudes through the actual bodywork when you put it back in, inside where you could see the nut earlier. On top would go that position there to clamp it in place, bodywork being the centre, with a nut on top. That's actually all it needs, because you can see everything's gone loose inside already from the spring. So you need an Allen key in the end with a spanner just to crack off and move it up. There we go. So what you find down here, this fits snugly onto here, so you need to prise it away. You need to do that with two hands. So on the base of the shock absorber, you can see that there. That's where the end of the spring needs to sit when you put it in. That comes out the end of that, and also you've got the spring compressor that's in there. So the bump stop. you can see, you don't actually need to tighten the spring down very far with these shortened springs. So there we go.